morning, everyone. I think you can hear me okay?
I'll stand down here.
We're about the same height. Well, welcome to the kickoff for Cybersecurity Month. Back when I started at St. Olaf, information security was done in the back room in the data center. It was a responsibility for the IT folks to take care of security. And most of you probably had no idea that that was something we were even concerned about. But as you know now, information security, both the risks and the responsibilities, have shifted from the back room, from that data center, to the front room, as well as to your own living room. And so Cybersecurity Month is an opportunity, it's a national event to try and raise awareness of what it means to secure yourself, your data, as well as for the college's data. A few years back, when the presidents got together from Carleton and St. Olaf, they were talking about collaborating. How can we collaborate together? How can we do things more efficiently? And how can we do things better? And I had the opportunity with my counterpart at Carleton to submit a request for that grant to say information security is something we think we can work together on. We think we can do it more cost effective. We think we can do it better if we had a program that we shared, that we developed together, that was managed by a person who would help us think through how do we maintain our security from the technical standpoint, help us kind of go through that, as well as to work with our communities to raise that awareness. And so we're using Cybersecurity Month as a way to raise awareness that to let you know we're thinking about security, that over the course of the next few years, we are going to be doing things that might seem a little uncomfortable, that might make you do things you don't necessarily think you should do. But we need to protect both your data, because remember the college is maintaining your data too. So we need to maintain and secure that data. And part of that is educating you on those simple things that you can do to protect the data. And as part of the grant, we have the great honor of now employing half-time Rich Graves. Rich is a Carleton employee since 2005. Before that, he was at Brandeis University. And if you look at Rich's signature line, he's got more initials after it because of all the certifications that he's gone through with information security. So today Rich is going to talk a little bit about some of the new services that we're rolling out, some of the new initiatives we're rolling out, but most importantly, he's going to start helping you think about information security and some of those things you can do to protect the data. So I have great honor to introduce Rich Graves.
There you go. I don't know if I need the mic. Yeah, I'll leave the mic on. So that was nice. It's good to be here. I can probably just wander around here. I don't know. I tend to wander, and I think I'll just kind of go back and forth around here. So as I said, I've been here a year and a half. My career, I've never had a real job. I've only ever worked in higher ed. I started undergrad at Stanford and kind of stayed there for 7 years, and went to Brandeis and went across. So my career arc has kind of been from very large universities to smaller and smaller schools. And what I've tried to do is cherry pick the best of what's out in the national conversation and try to say, well, what scales down to what we can actually accomplish. So working for Olaf and Carleton simultaneously is interesting. They have some slightly different cultures and budgets. My presentation at Carleton was very, very different. I hope this sets kind of the right tone here. Carleton, sometimes it's hard to talk about policy direction at all. And here, sometimes it's maybe the opposite is the problem, is we make sure we consider usability. And so I'm trying to forge some sort of common platform that works well for both schools and both cultures. So the first pitch here for Olaf is, well, what does more security look like? This is Le Pont des Arts. It's in Paris. So whoever got that right gets a prize. 45 tons of lovers' locks. So you fall in love, very, very romantic, you put your padlock on the bridge. The city fathers took this down in June 2015 because, you know, it's kind of collapsing under its own weight, which security sometimes does. This is also security. The Europeans actually have an advantage in making this pitch because in most Romance languages, security and safety are the same word. Security, seguridad. Security is not just about locking stuff down, it's making sure that things work and that things are as you expect them to be. Security should not be scary. There's a tendency, or maybe what you were expecting to hear here is a bunch of scary stories about, oh my God, the hackers are going to come in and steal all our information. Well, okay, maybe that's true too. But the story I prefer to tell is, here are the simplest things that you can do to make a real dent in cybersecurity. That, yeah, we've got hackers from Russia and China, whatever, trying to break in and undermine democracy. Okay, oh yeah, that's true. But, you know, the way that we know that is people get phishing emails and they notice and they tell someone about it. Someone sent a phishing email to the Dalai Lama's office, trying to break in and kind of undermine pre-Tibet. Someone reverse engineered that malware, got through to some Canadian researchers. They kind of blew the whole thing open. Defense is possible. Some defenses are cheap. And it's not a matter of adding endless locks upon locks upon locks. It's figuring out what are the current threats and where can we focus our resources. So over the past 25 years, I've been here 25 years. I mean, 25 years ago, a lot of people at Olaf and Carlton had very long tenures. So 25 years ago may not seem a long time ago. Some people, that's about the average age of this room is kind of close to mine. But if there were young people in here, I mean, Taylor Swift was born in 1989, and that's when I started college. Kind of scary. So in '92, when I was just starting my career, my girlfriend was studying at Leningrad State, which I think was just changing to St. Petersburg. And it took 2 days to get an email there through a bunch of hippies. Now we're 200 milliseconds away from North Korea. And this is, I don't know, people may recognize this. This is the poster for the Sony Pictures major motion picture that got canceled because Sony Pictures was hacked and almost driven out of business. But something to remember. If you do the math, 2 days, 200 milliseconds, that's a factor of about 8 million. Defense has also improved by a factor of 8 million if we use it correctly, as long as we use current strategies. So I mentioned North Korea, just doing a little Google search, turned up this. If you think, well, the big national security conversation doesn't affect us. But again, this is not just to scare you, but also to say real people are doing real work to make a difference in the world. These are our peers at Middlebury College. I mean, actually the Monterey Institute, which is associated with them. They run this little project to buy satellite imagery and have the general public do crowdsourced analysis of nuclear test sites. So kind of a fun little project for kind of a poli-sci major like me who's interested in kind of human rights, international peace. You know, it's a little side project. They were shut down by North Korean hackers a couple days before their last nuclear test. There are people at St. Olaf and Carleton doing this sort of work. I do know of Carleton and Olaf political science faculty who were approached by phishing emails that appears to be kind of intelligence related. So this does happen. If you have a friend of a friend in the presidential administration, you are potentially a target. But on the other hand, you're a target because you scare them. Our power is to kind of be out there using our information security, saying what we believe, and we can stand up to this. This site has not been shut down permanently. They were a little inconvenienced, but hey. So when we think of, well, I've been in the business since '92, kind of increasingly do InfoSec. Well, how have things changed? And again, we can't just be saying, we need more security, we need more security. There's budget pressure, there's time pressure, there's staff pressure, there's just simply attention. You can't pay attention to everything you do every single moment of every day. Given current realities, what are our priorities now? And so I'm going to try a audience participation exercise that I actually pulled from the sexual harassment training at Carleton. And the exercise is, so I bet half of you have a smartphone, right? So pull out your smartphone, sorry. And those of you already on the InfoSec committee, you're cheating because you already know the answer to this, but exercise, according to the St. Olaf data classification policy, which is easily found in Google, I would hope, how do we classify student ID numbers? Someone not on the InfoSec committee have an answer yet? Big smile.
Like how were they determined? Like how were they created?
Sorry. So
Medium.
the answer is medium. Okay, but then I'll talk about what that means. So this is actually a change. Until last year, we considered student ID numbers and staff ID numbers very high-risk information because they were protected data under FERPA. And in the past, when databases were fairly primitive, a malicious person could go up to the registrar, call up on the phone, or go in person, and maybe be able to convince them that, hey, I am student so-and-so, this is my ID number, and that will be the only authentication they need to get grades, get their transcript, or whatever. The systems don't work that way anymore. Because we have built additional layers of security around that, you can no longer, simply by knowing someone's student ID number, get very sensitive data and steal information. Therefore, we have downgraded the sensitivity of student ID numbers in our kind of official information classification policy. What that means is, if you complied with the letter of policies up until a couple years ago, you weren't supposed to email student ID numbers around. Now you can. I mean, still be kind of careful about student privacy and all of that. But this is intended to be an example of, you can't keep tightening up security. It's like what did Leia Organa say? It's like the more you squeeze your fists, the more systems squeeze out between your fingers. We need to prioritize. So it's kind of close. So marketing is hard. Because, I mean, I have kind of a ethical, philosophical, political science background, so when I think of the natural analogies to me of InfoSec and information protection is about grand themes of like history of political science, and I can quote you Czesław Miłosz. Any Czesław Miłosz fans here? No, okay. But I think most people have heard of Harry Potter, right? So I was going to say information security is not magic. Well, it kind of is, actually. I don't understand encryption. Let's just say information security is rarely magic, and even where it is magic, the most important spells are simple. Partly for narrative reasons, but also partly because it's true. All the big battle scenes in Harry Potter, they basically only use two spells, Stupefy and Lumos. So bring light to this situation, or just knock them off their feet. Even against the most advanced hackers, if you learn a couple simple techniques and do a couple straightforward things, you can knock them off their feet just long enough for kind of the professionals to go in and clean stuff up. So the trick is to identify, well, what are those special spells? What are the most important things that you need to teach and distill down? Because you can't just keep adding more and more and more. It just doesn't work. So this is kind of more of a joke slide, but like, so we've got this training coming up. Like, who do you imagine is going to attack children like yourselves? We have answers to that. We've got potentially people after our information, our student information. there is the grand political game going on. I'm not going to go into politics, but I mean, no matter where you are on the political spectrum, you have heard that information security has something to do with even very high level international politics at this point. So we've got this training program that's, except for a little branding, is common to both colleges. As of shortly before I checked, 44 people have finished it already in the first couple days it was open. This is kind of typical of any training program. You send it to 500 people, 10% are going to do right away, the rest kind of trickle over 30 days. I would actually prefer that you don't rush to get into this. I'd prefer that you kind of trickle it out module by module and see it within the context of your working life. Because this is not about click through compliance. This is about trying to apply the knowledge and cherry picking the most important things that you actually need to know. So what's in there this year? Who did the InfoSec training last year with all the shiny silver robots? I'm sorry. So there's 90% said fewer silver robots. The way my students working with this, I'm going to say, well, there's no silver robots anymore. Instead, there's freaky gray mannequins. But, the reason for those, by the way, is freaky mannequins or silver robots don't have racial or other secondary national characteristics, so they can sell the same content globally. Kind of makes sense. Because everyone identifies with a robot, right? So we made kind of I mean, you can make fun of those videos, and in fact, please be engaged. They are campy. It's okay to laugh at them, but they have a point, and we continue to license them because distilling information down to a very short period of time is really, really hard. I don't even know how long have I been talking? Probably 20 minutes already? Where's the clock? I should get some sense of time. But they're able to distill an amazing amount of information down to 25 minutes. Yes, it's corny, but it's pretty good stuff. And then, unlike last year, we're moving on to some practical exercises, which are different people have different backgrounds. It's really hard to know the level at which to aim these. But our goal is we're picking kind of the four most important things that I think people need to know to make a difference. The most important is Google two-step, which we'll talk a fair amount about in here, because it is a significant change that looks like a big hurdle to get over, but once you get into it, it's not really that big a deal. Microsoft Word encryption. Many departments at Olaf, actually more people at Olaf have already been doing this than at Carleton, but we want to bring kind of all departments up to at least a very basic level of not necessarily using it all the time, but knowing that the feature exists and knowing what questions to ask and when to apply this sort of stuff. Antivirus. Now, we'll get to that a little bit later. The information security community is kind of conflicted about antivirus nowadays because antivirus has pretty much lost. There's more malicious software than legitimate software being written by like an order of magnitude. You can't keep trying to enumerate bad stuff and hope to find it, because you know what? The bad guys can buy McAfee and Microsoft Antivirus too, and guess what? They can test it before rolling it out. So at best, antivirus is a tripwire after the fact, but I want everyone to know what it looks like, because not so much anymore, but over the past decade, there's been these rounds of fake antivirus. I don't know how many people have ever seen, you go to this website, it says, hey, your browser's compromised, click here and pay Russian hackers $10 to clean it up. We don't train people, well, what does a real antivirus alert look like? And what are you supposed to do when you get one? So it only takes a couple minutes, but I figure that's important to show. And then another big point that I sent an email about again this morning is Google Drive oversharing and cloud lock. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. We move from local campus storage to cloud services. I mean, Olaf's been on Gmail for what, 8, 9 years? Something like that. I mean, we cannot continue saying, keep stuff on campus, it's more secure. There's a lot of layers to that. But what we're trying to get to is figure out why was on campus or why is on campus more secure, and what are the analogous protections when we move to Google Drive. Part of that is Google two-step, and that's what half of the rest of the slides are about. Another part of it is CloudLock, and essentially what CloudLock does, it's a third-party service that starting tomorrow is going to continually scan all of our Google Drive files. If something appears to contain real social security numbers and appears to be shared outside the college, it's going to send you an email about it. And when we ran some tests, we found, there's a lot of people who have their W-2s in their Google Drive and shared it with mom and dad and got frustrated or accidentally shared it with the world. So we're going to tell people about this. Something scary about any time you're sending automated emails to people, it looks like a phishing email, so we want to make sure people know this is coming and this is legit, but also that when something comes from CloudLock, the only thing you should ever expect to hear from CloudLock is, there's this file in your drive and you might want to take a look at it. If anything claiming to be CloudLock or from IT or from me tells you to do something weird or asks for your password, that's not us. Call help us to report it. And kind of in general, this is a slide that isn't really necessary at Carleton, but I just want to underscore it here. The last thing I want anyone to learn from information security awareness training is to comply with IT mandates. Because compliant people are prey for phishing. Question authority, says who? So think for yourself, be skeptical. It's okay to stop and wait and think before acting, especially online. I think what's that may not be an Olaf safe joke. So jumping over any questions or whatever. I don't want to be just completely droning on. Yes.
So when you're talking about CloudLock, is that actually at Carleton too?
CloudLock, I think we're starting next Monday, but yeah, we bought it simultaneously for both campuses. Yes, so you're both Carleton and Olaf. So at Olaf, it's licensed for all faculty, staff, and students for various reasons, both because they haven't been in Google Drive for a while and there's some other licensing. Carleton is only licensing it for faculty and staff, but it's starting. The notifications are going to be starting for staff, faculty, and students tomorrow. I'm going to send a message out to Olaf Extra. I don't want to bug. This doesn't apply to every student. I don't want to spam all students, but I figure if I kind of throw it out to St. Olaf Extra, I want to get enough of an awareness in the student body that if they start getting these things saying, hey, your W-2 is there, that there's some general awareness that is expected. That answer the question? Yeah. So, and I think everything I'm saying in both these slides applies to both Carleton and Olaf. If not, go ahead and ask now or later. So this slide, I think, is the only slide that kind of talks about things that you may be expecting a security person to be lecturing you about, although some of the advice may be a little bit different. And NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology. I think it's a branch of US Commerce now. It's been floated around like DHS and stuff. But they are the official US government body in charge of setting security recommendations for federal agencies and contractors. And it's only a draft recommendation now, but they are really changing a lot of their advice depending on, based on what they see current attacks. So the way a lot of people do passwords, again, this was basically my password at Stanford in '92. Okay, your password needs to be 8 characters or more. This is a very secure password, right? It's got all the things that the password policy asks for. It's got an uppercase character, a lowercase character, it's got numbers, it's got it's got a special character because that's a plus, not a T, right? And I change it frequently. I change it from O1 to O2 to O3. That's secure, right? So the current research, I'll get to the current research recommendation now. So again, this is an example of, well, some of our old thinking may need to be reapplied. And there's a couple other things about two-factor that roll into this as well. The current recommendations for NIST, and again, this is mostly for like public-facing services or interaction with the general public. Our auditors and others may expect us to have more frequent, meaningful rotation for like business office staff. But for Google, Microsoft, and public-facing services, certainly our students, or for your personal use of other cloud services. I can't tell you how many times a conversation with someone has started with, so I come to talk to someone about security, and they say, they very guiltily say, well, yeah, you know, I know I should change my passwords more often, and I know I should have a more complex password. No. Because there's a great paper out there if you want to go into the academic literature. I mean, Dick might want to look at this, or some of your people. There's a paper, literally, the title is something like, literally like, differences in security advice between experts and non-experts. It's a paper from Google Research, I think. And ultimately it comes down to people who are not really deep into security think, well, you need a very complex password, you need to change it all the time, and I'm so guilty for not doing that. But actual security experts, starting about 10, 15 years ago, gave up on all that. Because the old advice about password complexity is about based on what computer cracking was capable of in the late 80s. The reality today is you cannot remember a password that a computer can't crack. So we need to have our defenses elsewhere. So number one is choose a different password for each service. I think most people have learned the lesson here. I mean, I don't, how many of you got an email from me about LinkedIn and MySpace stuff? Well, I know some people who just aren't raising their hand, but so there have been these mega breaches recently. So Yahoo had a breach, MySpace, LinkedIn, a bunch of places. Many people, including me, 20 years ago, were in the habit of trying to take a really secure password and use it everywhere. And 20 years ago, everywhere was maybe 10 places, right? That doesn't work anymore. What the recommendation from every security expert now is write your passwords down securely in a password manager of some sort. I looked at my password manager the other, so I looked at my password manager there. I share a password database with my wife. There are 233 entries in it. And most of them are not really, I am in IT, but most of them are not things that you wouldn't have, like my frequent flyer numbers, online banking, credit cards. So, your question?
Would you say something about options for password management?
Yes, that's next slide or next couple slides.
Sweet.
Yeah. So,
Rich,
yeah.
you yourself have 233 passwords. I probably do too. I honestly don't care if my son's soccer schedule password is the same as my utility bill password. Does that really matter?
It depends. I mean, they're in the.
As long as I'm not using that also for my online banking.
In the InfoSec literature, there's a couple different schools of thought on that. It's it depends. I mean, I don't remember, it's Jasper Jensen, if you want to look at the actual literature, he has a paper about kind of the social economic costs of creating things. I mean, having tiered passwords, low-risk passwords and higher-risk passwords is a valid strategy. The problem is it's hard, sometimes it's really hard to identify where the lines are. For example, in a lot of states, I don't know if this is the case in Minnesota, but in a lot of states you can do voter registration by showing your utility bill. And utility bill can also be a proof of identity in other contexts. So And it's not just, okay, that itself is a low-risk site, but it's hard to know where the line is, and the aggregation of even all these low-risk things can really add up. Like, what other information is, like, I got my frequent flyer miles, flyers through Delta. What sensitive information is there? Well, you got at least the last 4 digits of my credit card, which can be used in certain ways. Just simply telling the last 4 digits to some providers can be proof of identity. So it's hard to say. There are other alternatives to that problem. One is, well, we'll get to it. Kind of the expert advice is save it in a secure password manager. Another thing you can do is there are password managers built into your web browser. Pick something random and save it in Chrome. If it's low risk, that's fine, because yes, someone who has access to your computer could potentially log into those sites, but if it's low risk, who cares? What you are protecting yourself against is not so much a break-in from your computer, but a break-in to their computer. Because if you use the same password everywhere, or even permutations on the same password, because it's common for people to say, like, I did this myself until 5 years ago, I finally gave up. So my password, I had a common root password, and then append a few digits based on the name of the site. Yeah, you can figure that out, and then what if you have to change your password one place, then, okay, is that my last version, is my next version? I mean, really my recommendation is use a password manager, write it down. It starts to break down. But if you're sure something is really, really low risk, that's okay. But be careful with that. There was a, I don't remember the name of it, there was some kid's toy in the UK. So you buy this toy, it has some online component to it that your kid can play a game online. One of those sites was breached. And so it had kids' names, addresses, gender, sometimes pictures. It's just a kid's toy, right? But or also imagine, like, well, what if the opposite happens? Like someone breaks into Delta and it's the same password on the kid's toy site. I mean, when any password database gets breached, hackers take that password list and try it everywhere. So, and two-step verification, which is kind of the next stuff. I'm mostly going to skip this. You can read it later, but this is about change password when you suspect it's been compromised. The opposite of that, that's mostly kind of to contradict to say you need to change your passwords every year or something, because if you have 213 passwords or 300, you're changing a password every day. Unless you have a tool to do that, which actually LastPass can do. Unless you have a tool to do that, that ain't gonna happen. And the question is, can you trust a site to tell you when it's compromised?
In a timely way?
Increasingly, yes, actually.
Eventually.
Because, I mean, Yahoo, well, they're getting flamed in the New York Times and so on. This is Yahoo had the breach in 2014, but they didn't really confirm it until now. And I've seen this happen, that you may not know about a breach until a couple of years after. But, I mean, they got flamed for it, but this is becoming, the expectation is becoming, if a site gets breached, A, if they know that it was serious, it will get out. And increasingly the expectation is Dropbox, Facebook, Last.fm, if they're breached, they will force a password reset. So for the most part, again, this is not 100%, for your most secure sites you should pay more attention. But for the most part, I would say don't worry about changing your password on a rotating basis. Rely on them to secure. Again, it depends. Another question, yeah.
Yeah, I'm wondering, I have my passwords on a Word doc on my Google Drive, and I'm using Google Two-Step. Is that secure enough?
That's good. The only thing I might add to that, which comes in later, is you could encrypt that Word file, or encrypt it with CloudLock as well. You actually have two options to super encrypt it. But yeah, we'll get to that. So yes, that is pretty good, and that's a pretty good practice. The only, I mean, if I were a bad guy trying to break in, that file potentially is still exposed to something running as you on your computer. So it's a bigger risk if you like it at the kind of the Word file sitting in your desktop rather than Google Drive, because we actually have seen this happen. You get, in a sensitive office off of Carleton actually, you get some malware, it searches your drive for things that look like social security numbers or passwords and sends them off to Russia. This does happen. It can also happen with passwords saved in your browser. Chrome is a lot better than Firefox that way, so in general, I highly recommend Chrome. But even Chrome, there is a really advanced malware can steal your password saved in the browser, so be careful with that. Again, it depends on the risk. You can't lock down everything all the time. Yeah.
And then my other concern is my contacts list on my iPhone. I've got social security numbers and frequent flyer numbers and all kinds of information for my whole family there.
iPhones are good, is my general advice.
So I mean, the question is that secure? I mean, can somebody get into my contacts list and get all that information?
In terms of risk, I would say, I mean, there is no absolute 100% security. If you look at physical security, so like, how do they rate safes? If you look at underwriters' laboratories' ratings on safes are based on the type of tools you can use, how expert you are, and how long it takes. So a safe literally is rated, and you can look this up. This safe, if you have power tools and an expert, they will break into the safe in 30 minutes. So there is no absolute security, but I will say iPhone is a better choice than Android. Mobile device is in general, again, these are very broad strokes. Mobile device is a better choice than a PC or a Mac. And I'll get to the reasons later. But
that's reassuring.
But the fact that you have two-step turned on means they can't get it on the other end, because usually you sync your contacts up to Apple or Google. If you're protecting Google two-step there, that's pretty good. So you're doing you're doing pretty much all the good things. And we've mentioned two-step a couple times. The general message is passwords are passé. This is old school two-factor. I had one of these at Stanford 25 years ago. You had this device that reads off a rotating number, and then you need to transcribe it to get your code in. These still exist, but there are more user-friendly options now. And it has gotten to the point where this is just becoming expected. Most social media, even kind of what you would consider low-risk things like Facebook, Twitter, although your kids' pictures, you know, your entire life, maybe Facebook is high risk to a lot of people. But I encourage people to see this not as an additional step, but as a change in strategy. So, kind of, the old strategy, maybe that's the next slide. The old strategy is you log onto a computer with your password, and then you go away, and then you log on again. The new strategy is most of you are carrying a smartphone right now that's more powerful than a 1990 supercomputer. You identify yourself strongly on that device, you keep that device secure, you leave a pin on it or fingerprint, and that device stays logged in. That's kind of the new model. But to get us to use that model, if you try to combine that model with a password model, it breaks, because then you can turn any device into this super device. So that's what two-step is about. And I'm just going to share this because it's amazing. I'm not going to play the whole thing. How many of you have seen this before? Yeah. Keep in mind, this is an official US government document. Oops, whoops, no. I missed.
Your password isn't secure. There's nothing that a hacker loves more. But there's an easy thing you can do to prove the logger in is you. Authenticate, strong authenticate. Make your logins extra safe. Protect your identity from tragic fate. Authenticate, strong authenticate. Use your fingerprint, your face, or a code.
Okay, as I said, marketing is hard. Yeah. I'm not sure what demographic they're going for there, but it's probably not me. They eventually get to Left Shark, which again, I don't know how many people know what that is, but that was a meme from like 2-3 years ago at the Super Bowl, and that they're considering current now. I think some 40 or 50-year-old told some 30-year-old do something that's hip, and this is what they came up with. But I said this partly to make fun of it, but also to say that, so this is the lead video and kind of the lead message of National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. So this is, I guess I'm out of context here. So President Obama issued a proclamation encouraging all Americans to do this. And what is this? Many of you people are already, or at least know about this. Smartphone app, phone call, text message, security key, one-time codes. These technologies are getting much easier to use than they were even just a couple years ago. And I'm not going to ask for raising of hands, but I know increasingly this is becoming an expectation, and we're not setting a hard, I am encouraging Roberta not to try to set a hard deadline, because we need to flow into this, but our expectation is this is where we want to go, especially for higher risk accounts. Everyone in IT has been doing this for over a year at both Carleton and Olaf. I think most people in the business office and other high risk offices are getting into it. This is the way things kind of need to be now. Because password, you can't remember a password a computer can't crack. And you can't remember 300-400 passwords, and it's only going to get worse. So you use the device to authenticate you. Challenges, obvious. These are kind of the obvious questions. So what about, and there's two big things. I said, well, the new model is the old model. The old model is you log into a computer and then you walk away. Well, that is still the model in our shared classrooms. And that's actually increasingly a rare model in the wider world. More people are accessing the internet from a mobile device than from a PC today. But we still have to deal with the fact that faculty and students need to log into a public lab. And Carleton is able to whitelist some of these spaces. Olaf really can't because it's all driven by Google. And all I can really say is, yeah, we need to have backup options. The good news is your profile at Olaf is persistent. So if you as a faculty member go to a classroom at the start of term, log in once, you shouldn't be bugged for phone verification again for at least another 30 days. But you should be prepared for that. This is also why I can't really say, some schools like Stanford has made two-factor mandatory for everyone, including students, since 2013, because they're really at high risk. We want to try to kind of ease into it, but I do expect that most staff ought to be able to be doing this on their computers, because most of us, how many different computers do we use over the course of a month? Not many. Faculty and students are the exceptions, not the rule. Another challenge is if you don't have a smartphone. The point about Marlene Dietrich is she has big pockets. Most women can't carry an iPhone 6 comfortably, but there are other options. There's this YubiKey thing. It's a little kind of a key dongle that you plug into a USB port. It's a very nice little thing. InfoSec 101 talks about these various options. It is very common for people to sign up for two-step thinking, oh, that's easy, I'll just have it text my cell phone, that's fine. And then they're stranded 6 months later. And so something I really want to stress, and do stress in the InfoSec 101 training, is you're not done setting up two-step until you have verified that you have a backup option that works. My expectation for most staff is your primary, I mean, depending on how you work, your primary is actually probably gonna be your desk phone. So it rings your desk phone, you transcribe a code, or you can make your primary your cell phone and your secondary your desk phone, but you need independent second factors because you don't want to get locked out.
How do you set that up?
There's no really, it depends. There's no really short answer. If you go to the Google two-step, it'll walk you through it. There's all the way down the page, it talks about alternate factors. If you do the training, it talks you through that and has a little quiz at the end. On some providers, you can't. Like if you go to the two-step for Wells Fargo, you only have an option for a text message. Which for banking is actually okay. That's an okay risk trade-off, because how often do you need to make an emergency banking transaction from a random computer? That's actually something you want to actively deny. Whereas your Olaf account, your Carlton account, you need to be able to log in from anywhere on any device, and therefore you need to have these backups. So kind of the last thing is you can get a paper list of codes, scratch off codes. This is kind of old school, but it is also necessary sometimes. If you're traveling internationally, you may not want to take your cell phone with you to certain countries for other security reasons. So where are we today? I'm sure this number is even higher now. Olaf started later, but it's kind of accelerating faster than Carl. So the orange is Olaf, blue is Carlton. Olaf is now beating Carlton for whatever it's worth. How to? Yay. Yeah, it's like I would say I feel very welcome here, although it was a little bit weird at the kind of the opening president's speech singing the Olaf fight song, which explicitly calls for beating Carlton down. I love the ending with a bang though. I'm not going to do justice other than to say, to answer your question about password managers, LastPass and KeyPass are excellent tools if you want to invest the time to learn them. In particular, if you use LastPass.com and you just do a Google search for those names, you'll find the right thing. Because nothing could go wrong by doing an internet search and downloading whatever comes, right? So I should probably say explicitly LastPass.com is legit. LastPass.com also has a two-factor option. So basically, you store your passes up there, they're encrypted. You can get to them from any browser, assuming you also have your phone on you. So great menu layer protection there. They have a browser plugin that is a little hit or miss sometimes. You can talk to IT about it. But for a lowest common denominator, and what works for my wife, and works for non-technical people, is a lot of departments have like your Word file of your department passwords. Just put a password on it. Done. You don't need to learn anything else. And it's something that you can share with any number of people. There's obvious caveats to that, like how do you ever change that, but it's pretty good. It's a lot better than having a Word file just sitting on your desktop, unprotected. Kind of almost the last slide here, and some more questions. So antivirus, app stores, and app locker. So way back in the day, probably like this is more 80s than 90s, but there's no way that we could ever get in the way of people's freedom to run whatever software they want on their PC. Now, most people access the internet from an iPhone or something that you can't even get software unless it's through a vetted app store. IT has the capability at both campuses to do something similar, and we're exploring that, let's say. It's not rolling out, but we do expect to see this coming, probably in the more secure departments first. And just kind of another example about mostly skip this, but so how allegedly Chinese hackers broke into the US defense industry. They just sent this little email saying, I forwarded this file for review, and then it had an Excel document, like you get every day, right? You get these phony packaged things. The same techniques are being used by serious bad guys as kind of the everyday consumer level attacks. So personal advice, I'm also going to let you read this. All these slides are up on my blog. There'll be a link to that at the end. iPhones are good. Google Nexus and now Pixel are good. Be careful of cheap Android devices because they tend not to get software updates and they put you more at risk. Chrome is good. Again, most people have heard this advice before, but IT used to really push Firefox, and at neither campus do we recommend it anymore. I mean, it's not bad, it's just Chrome is a little nicer. But again, this is very, very rough cut, broad sweeping advice. Don't install stuff you don't need. For kind of personal security, Nate and I both kind of stumbled across creditkarma.com. Don't pay for identity theft protection. It's a scam for the most part. These sites like Credit Karma and Credit Sesame. Credit Karma is kind of my favorite. They are a free site. They are very open about how they pay for their service. They give you ads on credit cards that you're likely to qualify for based on your credit card. It's a nice privacy trade-off, but you know, they have your information anyway. It's up to you how you weigh that risk. Kind of concluding, biggest wins for Olaf. Do this training, it talks about a bunch of stuff. Google two-step is very big, and it's covered in training. And if you have a Word file with sensitive information, do all of these things is the tough part, because a great way to lose data is to set a password on a file and forget it. So make sure you have the department password that everyone knows, which again, certain threats is, oh, that's insecure to share a password, but you know, what threat are you protecting against? You have multi-layers of authentication. You have to authenticate to get to your shared drive or the Google Drive area with two-factor, and then additionally, you have another layer. So that's what I got. More questions, or I think we're almost out of time, right?
We've got about 15.
Oh, good. Oh, that was about perfect, because I started talking really fast, and I was may have blown away your brains, but I think I got done in time. So, questions, comments, whatever. Yeah.
This isn't really a security question, but so I've been using Firefox. If I'm switching to Chrome, can IT show us an easy way to save all our bookmarks over?
That's in mind, that's why I haven't switched. Who uses bookmarks? I know it's old fashioned, but.
Yeah. The front two rows say yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Then I'll do it today.
I'll come watch.
Okay.
I mean, again, none of these are really, there are a few hard and fast, these are just kind of in general. I mean, and it's kind of the economics of all this. Yes, iPhones are more expensive, but you know what? Apple actually provides software updates on a reliable basis for a 4 or 5 year period. Whereas if you buy a cheap Android phone, you're going to get 2-year-old software that has all security stuff, and it's not going to be supported. And, you get what you pay for sometimes. Yeah.
It surprises me because Google uses Android, and
Yeah.
I was thinking of Google as being very secure and
Yeah.
very security.
Well, iPhone or kind of the Google dedicated devices. I mean, they're kind of the other top tier Android devices are also pretty good. Samsung does a pretty good job of keeping things up to date. Sony is notoriously bad. And generally, it's like older, cheaper phones, you may not get software updates, and you may have other nagware on them. But again, it's kind of a risk trade-off. I mean, how much of a target do you think you are? For example, the cheapest flip phone you can buy today that enables you to do two-factor is much better than nothing at all. So, pick your poison. What else? Yeah, sure.
So it's relatively new to say to people they should write their passwords down.
Yeah.
Now we're supposed to. Tell me bad ways to do it.
Yeah, bad ways to do it, kind of the stereotypical bad way to do it.
Post-it note on your
Post-it note
monitor.
on your monitor, or under your desk, or stuff like that. Although, again, it depends on the risk profile. If a post-it note on your desk is a vulnerability to someone walking into your office. If you're not worried about someone walking into your office for that specific threat, that can be valid. A Word file sitting on your desktop called passwords is asking for trouble. Emailing passwords to anyone ever. Well, again, there are exceptions to every rule, but as a rule, no one should ever ask for or send or receive a password via email. Google Drive potentially is a decent option. I guess it's not covered in here, but there is, if you have a Word file in your Google Drive, you can encrypt it at the Word level. There is also, and this is new with CloudLock, if you have your Google Drive open, if you have a spreadsheet or a Google Doc, I guess it's just called a Google Doc, isn't it? You can right-click on the file and say encrypt with CloudLock. And you can set a password at that layer so that even if someone breaks into your computer or gets your password and your second factor device, or if you need to keep something private from IT or Google. If Google or IT or foreign intelligence is part of your threat model, which it might be for some faculty or students doing certain research, then you can super encrypt within Google Drive using either the functionality built into Microsoft Office, or CloudLock can encrypt any file. One caveat on the cloud, it's kind of a plus and minus. So I said keep it secret from IT. We are having many layers of authentication protecting it, but for our own, to protect the institution from someone getting hit by a bus, if you use the CloudLock encryption option, there is a mechanism for IT to talk to someone to get a password recovery key. So you don't need to worry about, as a rule, the general rule is if you encrypt a file and forget the password, the file is gone, unless you escrow it somewhere else. With CloudLock, the escrow is done within the tool, and it's going to be accessible to IT and the controller jointly. It's kind of a complicated answer to that question, but
But that's a real risk.
yeah.
Because the file really is
Yep.
goodbye.
Yep. Yep. So you do need to be careful about encryption because
So
I
you
mean.
might want to write that password down.
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah. So yeah, so write the password down. Also, kind of contrary to kind of what people may expect, kind of a common password or a department passphrase for all your super double secret predation files is not a bad thing, because again, it's multiple layers of authentication. They have to authenticate to get to your shared department drive, and then the additional layer of encryption of the password itself is something you got in your head. You've got maybe something you have a sticky note on your monitor, but you're protecting from different threats at different layers. So someone who breaks into your computer, who has malware, who has a virus running on your computer, is you and has access to all of your files. That's kind of an advanced threat.
Kind of.
But it does happen. I mean, if you're worried about that advanced threat, then an additional password, an additional very long password. Again, if you're paranoid, if you're Ed Snowden type, if you're encrypting a file, again, I didn't talk about this much, but there are different types of passwords. Again, this is kind of a complicated thing, but there are pins. There are three kinds of passwords. There are pins, which is like your ATM pin, and a pin can be fairly short because a pin has other sort of very harsh protection around it. If you type your pin like 4 or 5 times wrong at an ATM, it's going to eat your ATM card. If you're at Carleton, you have a BitLocker laptop, it's going to lock out a couple of wrong attempts. I'm careful saying that because at Olaf BitLocker, you do need to lock ones. So Password case number 1 is a PIN. That can be as short as, I mean, I'd probably say the minimum you really want to go is 6 characters. If anyone has a newer iPhone or even just a newer version, Apple has changed from a minimum 4 digits to 6. And that's what most banks are doing for the ATM cards as well. Next layer is password. So your online account should be protected if possible by 2-factor authentication, even if not, it can only be attacked over the network, and one would hope that they've got logs and stuff and can throttle bad password attempts. So online password, use 2-factor if you can, 8 or 9 characters, I mean, is decent complexity. Ideally, you would use a passphrase because passphrases are kind of easier to type, especially on a smartphone. Like, you ever tried to do a long, complex password with a lot of special characters on an iPhone? I would much rather type a 20-character, all lowercase password than, but anyway. And then the last is encryption key passwords. That's like your Word file with your super, super, super secret stuff that you don't want Chinese intelligence to read. Those, that's a different threat model because a PIN, you've got the device itself protecting itself. An online password, you have the server on the other end protecting itself. But if someone gets an encrypted file, the only protections are math and physics. Because even my smartphone can do 2 billion mathematical operations per second. It can do about 20 million password attempts per second. So if you really need to secure something really high security, the floor is 3 random words of a passphrase, like 3 random words, at least 16 characters. And by random words, I mean random words, not like a phrase that occurs to you. Again, depending on your level of paranoia. There's this diceware system. What I tend to do is kind of scan around the room. So my password is light, green, pink, checkered. That's a fairly good random password. I write it down. You can also use that kind of system for like communicating over the phone. If you need to give very sensitive information to a parent via email. Now, we're not going to teach every Olaf parent how to encrypt files with Microsoft Word. That is not going to happen. However, we can learn how to encrypt stuff with Microsoft Word, and it is fairly easy for a remote parent to open a file that we have encrypted. So what you can do, and what a lot of departments both here and at Carleton are already doing, and more can do, is say, yeah, you need to exchange some really sensitive information with someone. You put it in a Word file or a PDF, you encrypt it, and you tell them the password over the phone and forget it. Because you will never need that password again because you're transferring information to them. They don't need to write out either, they just need to open it once. You've transferred the information securely. Google can't read it, hacker can't read it. So what I'm trying to give you is kind of the basic building blocks to build your spells. Yeah.
Did you said that it's easier to encrypt a Google Doc than it is a Word file? Because you said right-click on it and then you can encrypt it right there.
I think we're over time, right? But no, oh, we're not yet. Okay.
So if I have a Word file on my Google Drive, it's better to download it as a Google Doc and then right-click on it and I should be able to encrypt it easily.
It depends. So I'll walk you through it very quickly. So if you live in Microsoft Office, as some people do, like accountants. Accountants are never gonna, well, never is a long time, but accountants cannot live with the limitations of Google Sheets. Some authors cannot live with the limitations of Google Docs, they need Word. If you're in that world, you use the encryption feature built into Word. I could demo it, but basically look at the course. And if you have a native Google Doc, here's how you do it. You just do, I think I don't want to encrypt actually, that was like a new one. What's this? I think this was an encryption demo from before. So you have some random document, super secret, saving Google Drive, is there? So you right click, open with Cloud Lock selective encryption. And hopefully I'm not blocking you with my ad blocker. And it's going to ask you for a passphrase. The complexity of this kind of depends on your threat model. Even a very simple password here is good enough to protect against viruses grabbing your stuff. If you're worried about a government threat, then you do a four random word, random passphrase. You save it, it stays encrypted. So it's just. You encrypt them all. This works with presentations, sheets, and docs. It's thinking.
Slides.
It'll offer you to save that, and then this is now an encrypted document. The icon has changed in here. Yeah, you can do slides and presentation. You try to open that document again. Oops. Oh, no preview, but you need to open it with Cloud Lock selective encryption. Just going to try to open. If I can remember the password I set just a second ago. I think my ad blocker is getting in the way, so never do a live demo is the lesson. So I bet one of these is getting in the way, which again are lovely things to do, but kind of beyond the scope of this. Ad blockers are kind of their own discussion, but they tend to get in the way of fancy things with interaction of cloud services. Other fun stuff?
Is the Cloud Lock available for uploaded documents, a PDF or something?
Yes, with limitations. So there are serious feature limitations on the current Cloud Lock stuff, which is, I don't want to push it too much because I know that the next version is going to be a lot nicer. Currently, they only let you encrypt per file. They are coming real soon now, they say. Well, they were saying real soon now, and then they were acquired by Cisco, and so everything has become longer. They are promising folder encryption, which is going to be a lot easier to use because you simply drop something in a folder, it's super encrypted. So if you want to do non-Google data stuff, I would say wait a few months or do an encrypted zip file or something. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.